What do you love about being outside and active?
I'm sure I've spent more time outdoors than in. That just feels like home.
Enjoy what you can do, because you never know what is around the corner.
Just being outdoors in the fresh air, it just clears my mind.
Fully immersed in nature is what brings me the most joy.
Hello and welcome back to the Outside and Active podcast, where this week my special guest is Simon Minty. Simon has delivered consultancy in the field of disability since the early 2000s, working with some of the biggest organisations in the world such as HSBC, Google and the BBC. And he's done all of this whilst also being a TV and social media personality. He's also got a creative side helping to improve the portrayal of disabled people on screen. And in 2020, he joined the board of the National Theatre in London. Simon has a personal experience being disabled, being of short stature and having limited mobility. He draws on his own experiences as well as those around him to be able to deliver the highest quality of consultancy. And if all of this wasn't enough, Simon has recently returned from Cologne, where he was taking part in the World Dwarf Games. We find out so much more about this competition and how Simon got on in this podcast. But before we jump into the conversation, if you think you know someone who would enjoy this episode or this podcast just as much as you, then please do forward it on to them and let's grow this outside and active community. Without further ado, let's jump straight into this episode with Simon Minty. Hello and welcome back to the Outside and Active podcast, where today my special guest is Simon Minty. Simon, hello, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you, Dom. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. I'm really looking forward to this episode and chatting to you. But before we dive into it, I'm going to offer you a piece of advice. And this piece of advice is not from me. It's from someone who has been a guest on the podcast before, and they're leaving a piece of advice for someone. And for the someone today is you. And this piece of advice comes from Sir Chris Hoy. And his his piece of advice is, if a job is worth doing, it's worth doing properly. And he's taken that from as advice that his grandmother gave to him, and now he wanted to pass it along. So I guess the question from that is, what's your immediate feeling and reaction to that advice?
I remember that. I think my parents would tell me that. It's like variation. If a job's doing well, yeah, you've got to do it well or whatever. And I like it. And it is a philosophy I do. So when I'm doing my work, I want to be prepared. I want to do as much as I possibly can. So yeah, I agree with him. It's if you're going to do it, you may as well make the best of it.
And that's something we do in every episode. And the other question that I ask to every guest, and it's purposefully vague because I like to see where people take it, but is, what do you love about being outside and active?
Qualification first, because I think I'm a little bit more an indoor person. And I don't know if that's related to being someone with dwarfism and disability, or whether it's just, I've always had sporting ability because my parents have, but I couldn't also do the practical things. And when people go, let's go for a big walk on a mountain or over a hill, I go, well, no, I don't really want to do that. That's quite a lot of hard work. However, there is equipment that allows me to do that now. When I'm feeling a little bit restless or blue and I'm in my flat, there's a park right opposite where I live, and I will go out and I just go around for an hour and a half on my scooter, and it just naturally lifts me. So, I mean, I don't want to sound corny, but there's more outside. That's the point. There is, whether it's the country, whether it's the beach, wherever it might be, whether it's a sports place. So, yeah, I do like being at home, but it picks you up.
I like that. There's a few topics and themes that are going to run throughout our conversation and through this podcast. Disability being one of them, you've touched on already there. Inclusivity and opportunity, I think, as well. And I also want people to learn from this podcast, and especially from what you do as a job. And you were talking about being active there, and that's something we're going to come onto later with something that you've just come back from, which looks amazing. I'm excited to hear more about that. But also, if because this can sometimes be a taboo topic, I want you to pick me up on anything that maybe talking about disability or talking anything about inclusivity that might be wrong, because I think there'll be people listening to this that maybe will want to learn, and I think that's quite important as well. But I want to kick off with actually asking what you do day to day. Disability consultant, can you explain a bit more about what that actually is?
I can. I'd also say you are a lot younger than me, and I also feel the world has moved on some of these inclusion topics, and I'll probably learn from you. Some of the stuff that I am pleased about or appreciate you guys take for granted. It's a mutual one, but I'm not very good at doing it in a nutshell, but my main job is a trainer and consultant. So I work with larger companies, working with Google or HSBC, and I do training and consultancy around disability, mostly in the workplace. So I might work with managers and helping them support their colleagues or team members who have a disability. And I work with people who have disabilities doing career development programs. I have a couple of other things. I sit on 2 boards because I apparently have wisdom due to my age or experience, and that frustrates me. You still want to be a rebel, but anyway, so the National Theatre, which is a remarkable place and creative and culture, and I adore that. And an organization called Motability Operations, which is a car leasing company for disabled people. 700,000 customers. We buy 200,000 cars a year. It is a mammoth organization. I do a little podcast myself with my colleague Phil, The Way We Roll. And I pop up on TV from time to time as I'm part of a TV show with my sister.
Lots of different things. You're busy.
Yeah. You know what? With the risk of sounding a little bit pompous, being self-employed is great for me. And I always remember when I changed my career quite early on, mid-20s, late 20s. If you said, what do you want to do when you're older? This is kind of it. I mean, I've sort of managed to wangle it that it's pretty good.
You mentioned that career change. So this isn't something that you've been doing kind of from the offset. What was it you initially were involved in?
I messed around doing A-levels, never finished them. Then I worked for Barclays Bank for 7 years, and I used to run training courses for them. So I've always done training, and I love training. It's my instinctive, natural place. But after 7 years, I thought I was mid-20s, and I thought there's more to the world. So I went backpacking, and then I went back to university as a mature student. I said to Barclays, I'll come back if you put me in the diversity team. And they said no. And so I said, okay, I've got to go elsewhere. And that's when I became self-employed.
And how have you seen in that time portrayals of disability in media and also the approach in businesses change and maybe evolve over the time that you've been working in this sector?
This morning, I'm writing, for 2 days, I've been writing a chapter for a book that someone's asked me to do about the representation, particularly of dwarfism. So it's really in my head right now. And I think it's phenomenal. And I think the change has been amazing. I saw someone this week who is involved in this field, and I said, I'm scared that we're having this golden period of better representation on screen, on stage, just generally. And I'm scared it's temporary. It might be a flash in the pan. We'll have 2 years. And she said, no, the industry, society's woken up and thought, we've taken so long. We're embarrassed that we've been not good at this. And it feels like a permanent change. In terms of employment, it's hard. It's a mixed bag. I think if you do work for somebody and have a disability, more support, more openness, more career progression, more adjustments, but it's not quite there yet. There's still high unemployment. Still most likely, if you have a disability, you're going to be in poverty. There's still, and also just physical buildings, neurodivergent is something we're talking about a lot and trying to get our heads around because it's not properly included or dealt with. So as soon as you think you've cracked it, there's another area that we need to work hard on.
When you're going to businesses, organizations and talking to them about inclusivity and disability, is it predominantly visible or is it also invisible disabilities as well?
I'm pan disability or pan conditions, depending on what you want to talk about, call it. And I always have been. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't sit there and say, this is what it's like to have X. It's interesting. I did a career development program recently and someone wrote to me afterwards and said, yeah, you talked about this, but the difference is my condition means people don't always understand me. People make judgments about me. People don't always think about me. And I wrote back and said, no, that's the disability experience. It's not unique to you. We share all of that. So I can do that shared bit, but I try and work across the board. I have lots of experience, and obviously I'm deep into disability arts and culture, so I've got lots of reference points. But yeah, I'm not single issue. It's across the board. Occasionally they will direct me and they say, look, we're really weak on this area, or I mean, sometimes it's really clumsy. They go, you know what? We've done so much stuff on mental health recently or mental ill health. Could you do something else? Have you got any deafness? And you're like, oh, okay. So it's almost like this shopping list. But, you pick what will work and I weave other things in there. So, yeah.
You kind of name dropped a few different businesses, organizations that you've worked with. And my head went to, surely these massive worldwide international organizations must be clued up about how to be inclusive and disability awareness, but that maybe isn't the case.
I do a lot of name dropping, by the way. We've only just started. You wait, I'll be putting some big clunkers in later. Okay, so I would flip it around and kind of say, how can a small business of mine be working with these huge outfits? And maybe it's the other side of your same question, which is, surely they have it. Disability is an interesting one because for a long time, you'll have individuals within organizations who grab this and go, right, I want to change it. And they either are connected to it or they have something or they believe in it. And these are the real change makers. They're the people who pull me in to support them. So there is always good stuff going on inside. I used to go in and I might be starting from basics. You've got to look at the building and then you've got to write a policy and then you look at procedure, then you do your training and so on. Now they might have got some of that in place. So it might be very specific about events or communication or career development. So there is good stuff, yes, but things go wrong. There's still gaps. Managers, the middle managers who are the ones who have the real pressure on this, they've got so many demands and so many areas. And getting it right and being up to date on everything can be tricky. So some are good and some are not so good. What we always try and do, for want of a better word, is to embed it. So rather than have these dynamic individuals in an organization that drive it, you want it to be within the organization, irrespective of me or somebody else. So it's just part of the culture. And that takes a long time to get everyone to sign up.
And these businesses generally very receptive to the advice and the consultancy that you're giving them?
I'm lucky. When I joined, there was a chap called Phil Friend. He ran a company and he and I became a partnership and he'd already been established. In the 20 plus years I've done this, I've never advertised. I don't do direct selling. I've never approached them. I get approached. So they already want me. They're already interested in me. Of course, once or twice it's gone wrong or I've suggested something. They're like, no, we're not doing that. But for the most part, having the mix of what always used to be was, do you have authenticity, or we call it lived experience? So you know your stuff because you live it. But secondly, do you understand how businesses and large organizations work? Just saying this is me and this is how I live isn't sufficient. It's also, how do we structure this? What's the strategy? How do we keep this going? So, yeah, I mean, for the most part, they have been open to it. I like it when they push back because that means I'm challenged. I like training managers who don't want to be there because they think it's a waste of time. I like those because if I can win them over, they become the best allies. So yeah, for the most part, it's good though.
One thing that I kind of wanted to pick out from looking through your website was you work with big organizations that are international, and it says that it's allowed you to understand how different cultures approach disability. So I kind of wanted to explore that a bit more.
It's one of my favorite things to do, which is travel. And I've been lucky that I've had those international clients. I think of a big investment bank. I can think of the British Council, and they'd ping me off to all sorts of places, whether it's Southeast Asia, the States, but to Albania and Pakistan. And I'll meet other disabled people, and within 2 minutes, we get each other. And I love that. But then they'll say, what you have in the UK, you have law, you have structures, you have people like you who appear on television, you have an art scene, you have a sports scene, you have a benefit system, you have support, you have a car leasing company, they don't have any of that. And so in some ways it reminds me that although we've got a long way to go, we are quite fortunate. But equally, it's that I remember in Pakistan, disability might be seen as something that was religious or paying for something you've done in a previous life. And in China, people with disabilities were shunned or disappeared, or even there was a one-child policy in China for many years, so to stop the population growth. But if you had a disabled child, that didn't count towards your quota, which sort of just positions perfectly disability as a sort of it doesn't quite count. So understanding that, learning about that, and it is true, I learn hugely from other countries, of course I do, and I meet these amazing people who are pushing change under circumstances that are really difficult.
There's like two different sides there. It's you touched on the legal, obviously, side of support, but also social support and awareness and things like that. So you're looking at two different, kind of two-pronged approach, but are you able to take things back from other countries and kind of look at the UK and take elements learn from international experience?
Yeah, because some international clients, I had one very recently, a financial organization, and they said, can you tell us the best international companies that have the best approach to this? And what they want to do is blend it. I had one company that said, we want to write a policy on making workplace adjustments, but we don't know which country's law we should base it on because we're in 40 countries. And I said, well, why do we have to let's base it on the best combination of all of them. And you have an overarching policy that leads the way. So I forgot your question, but I'm going to do a slight digression. Globalization has difficulties and has drawbacks. One of the bits that is amazing is you can go into a multinational and their policies and procedure around diversity, whether it's ethnicity or gender or sexuality or disability, their policies can be stronger than what's going on in the country, and they can influence how a country approaches some of these really difficult subjects. So that's pretty amazing when I'm in a country talking to an organization about being better, and it's ahead of what's going on as a sort of a societal thing.
Interested to pick your brains about this kind of opinion or thought, because I've been fortunate enough to speak to Johnny Peacock on this podcast, who fantastic person, and speak to him about his experience with disability. Similarly with a gentleman called Darren Edwards, who fell whilst climbing and ended up being paralysed from the neck down and kind of wanting to break out of any sort of stereotypical mold, and he wanted to go kayaking, and he's done the 7 marathons in 7 days in 7 continents, and fantastic individuals, and hearing how they have similar but also different opinions about their own and disability in general. And it kind of came down to a mixture of wanting to spotlight someone's disability and celebrate it versus actually, no, disability is a term, but I'm actually just like you, but I have a different thing that I have to contend with. You have to contend with this. I have to contend with being in a wheelchair. So I just wanted to it's a bit of a long question there and a bit of a complex bit, but interested in your thoughts.
I understand it. And there is a perennial debate amongst differently disabled people, as in, if you get it from birth, most people, they get something in life, later on in life, particularly when they're older. But there'll be other people like Darren who might have an accident and so on. So, if you've led your life in a certain way, I met someone with MS last week. She's 31. She was so matter of fact about having MS. It even took me back. And then she also said, my greatest love is writing books and reading. So even when this MS gets pretty full on, I don't know how much of an impact it's going to have. Whereas if you are an athlete or a mountain climber, bloody hell, you want to get back out there and do whatever you did in a different way. So it depends on how it impacts and changes your life. Then you have the actual physical or mental changes, as well as then how society starts treating you. And does that start treating you as less, or excluding you, or not thinking about you? Or, they might overdo it and overly include you. We have a little line, which is very bad language, so forgive me, which is a super grip. And this is, you get something or you have a disability, and you completely overcompensate for it by doing 7 marathons in 7 days. Or me, I work way too hard because I'm trying to prove something. I spoke to Sophie Morgan, who's a wheelchair user and pops up on TV and does stuff. And she said, whenever I post social media, I always had to be positive. I didn't want to show them the not so good side. And I think we're getting more sophisticated, and we're allowing the true complexity of having a disability, where it's good and it can be bad. But remembering that sometimes the biggest issues or barriers are how we have society and how we've set it up and forgotten or excluded, or how people are treated. Get rid of some of those, and then being a disabled person, well, I think would be a lot more matter of fact. I don't know if I've answered that.
I think so. I think I like the way you. It was interesting just picking up what you said at the end there about society's kind of approach to it, because you and social media as well, because you posted on your social media a couple of months ago about an interaction you had with someone, I think at the shops, and how it maybe had an impact in your day, and people that are insensitive. If you don't mind talking about that situation, explain a little bit more kind of. I would.
Insensitive, it's beyond. I want to say they were little swear words. Yeah. And this is my point, is I've been me for over 50 years, and I've had dwarfism all of that time. So I know, and I can see it, and I know what's going to happen. This is not new. I've got my strategies, and I've got all my armor plating, and I've got all the people I speak to. So I'm pretty well set up. But every now and again, something punches through. And this was in a shop, and 5, 11 to 14-year-old boys who are my nemesis. And not a look or a stare or something like that. It was going past me deliberately, getting really close to me. I can't even remember what they said, but there was a sort of a line that was a dig, and then them giggling and laughing. And I was furious. I was absolutely furious. And the bit which I suppose is advantageous is now that one probably stuck around 24, 48 hours. It doesn't. The fact that I can't remember what they said shows, you move on. And for the most part, 98% of people are amazing and brilliant. This is my other. I always want to turn into a positive. I met a friend who is short, and she recently had to walk past some boys who were the same age, and she could see them nudging and getting ready. And she had to kind of literally go through them. And she said something like, "Excuse me." And one of them was ready to say, "Well, whatever," or give her some grief. But one of the boys said, "Let her through, let the lady through." And they all had to sort of separate, and she went through, and she looked back at him and said, "Thank you." And he nodded and said, "A pleasure." And I love that stuff, because I think the boy who did that had more strength and courage than all the little what's-its who are ready to give you grief. So, yeah, it happens from time to time. And it isn't unique to me. There'll be people with other conditions that get it. It can just be quite full on when they get through like that.
Like you said, 11 to 14-year-olds being a nemesis in a slightly jovial way. But is that potentially down to education in schools or kids like that?
When I put it on social media, it went ballistic, and I got 5,000 plus, reactions, which is quite a lot for me. And then loads of comments. There was 10% of the people wanted to punch them, and I'm like, no, I'm not encouraging that. I reckon 50% went straight to blaming parents, and I was like, no, I'm not telling it. I'm not saying this to start blaming parents for how they bring up their kids. And I don't think it's one single thing. I do think, of course, parents and their influence, but they can't always control that. It's the young boy who is stronger and says, "I'm not letting this happen," or "I'm going to tell my friends to back off." And I bet you bottom dollar, the one who was positive to my friend, he will have a connection. He will either understand disability or he'll understand difference in some way, because he just got it. There was a bit. So I also think the work that I do in terms of representation on screen and having people who are different popping up, it becomes boring. That's the plan. Me or anyone else who is different wandering around, you're like, well, yeah, they're different, but it's boring. Why would I even engage with that? I've seen it. It doesn't make any difference. That's the idea.
I like the way that you've put that. It becomes boring. becomes part of everyday.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I like that. Like I said at the beginning, I want people to be able to learn from this and take things away from it. And there's an article on Forbes, which I know you'll be aware of, 7 things disabled people have to think about every day. And I was reading through this, and it's something that I would take for granted if I had to go and see a friend in London in a restaurant in central London, that I have to think about what time my train is and what time I'm meeting them. Whereas this article, and I'd like to hear from your experience as well as what you would have to think about, makes you think the amount of different elements of travel, of society, of whatever else that you have to think about when you're traveling and doing a everyday thing.
I like the article because it's basic. It's a reminder of the ABCs, as in, am I going to be able to get there? Can I park? What's public transport like? Will I be able to sit down? Will I be able to go to the loo? Real basics that everyone else would take for granted. And it's that little reminder of, if you have a disability, depending on what it is, you may have another 5 questions. And part of the work that we do around making things accessible or making adjustments is the idea that you could turn up to anywhere and just do the same as anybody else. I went to Edinburgh recently, got the train there and back. I only do the train when I know I haven't got to make changes, because if I have to make changes, I'm terrified of getting stranded. I'd pre-booked all my assistants, and of course it wasn't there, so I have to go through a whole rigmarole to get people to help me and get on and off the train. I met a friend this week, and she's come up with, I think she called it a disability rider. So, you know, if you're like a band, you have your rider.
Yeah.
And this said, this is what I need. And it was like level access, no gravel, da-da-da. She also said everyone panics. She's a wheelchair user, so everyone says I've got to have an accessible loo. But the nature of her condition, she's not going to use a public toilet. She does that elsewhere. So she said, don't worry about a disabled loo. I don't need one. And so I think, a little rider, you don't want to have to say it. Ideally, you have a rider, tell people this is what I need. The other bit she had on it, she has a support worker, so someone who assists her with certain things. And she said, you don't engage with them. They are not part of you meeting me. They are there to facilitate certain things for me. And I think that's a beautiful, really insightful comment. So I said to her, I need a rider like this that you send people. So you say, this is what you need to know about. And I go back to my corny ambition, which is eventually that things on the rider will be less and less because it's already thought of. I have one client now that every time I turn up, there's a little step stool to rest my feet on. They even have a charger for my scooter. So what I have to take is less and less and less now because it's all there.
But that's not only impacting you, that's impacting other people that may be able to benefit from those changes.
Absolutely. I mean, the flip side of that is then you've got to tell people, because we don't expect them to have a step stool and a portable charger. So telling people this is what we got, welcome, come along. So the list can be long. There's also a self thing in that for a while I had a really difficult hip that was immensely painful. So I was using crutches. So I had crutches, I had a mobility scooter, I had to use a hearing aid. There's other things. And I'm like, oh man, the amount of kit that I have to take and make sure it works, make sure it's charged. When I pack my suitcase, it'll be the same as yours. And then there's the stick that I might take. There'll be the step stool that I might take. There might be 1 or 2 other things that I need to make sure they're there because it could be tricky for me otherwise. Anyone else who has a disability or has a difference, this is old hat to them. That sort of 7 thing they do automatically. Mm. But like I said, the aim is that gradually those 7 things reduce to 1, 2, because we're all aware we've got it sorted.
Well, the talk of travel transitions me quite nicely to talking about a trip that you've just been on to Germany, the World Dwarf Games. Tell me what it is and how you got involved, really.
This was the 8th World Dwarf Games. It happens every 4 years, just like the Olympics and the Paralympics. It is travel around the world. I think it might have started in the US, but the UK is a real leader on this. We have an organization called the Dwarf Sports Association of the UK. Phenomenal reach. I was speaking to one of the organizers, and they said, we think there's around 5,000 people who have dwarfism in the UK. We're in contact with 2,000 of them. So they've got a 40% penetration of the population. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Wow.
It is also amazing because you go along to these things and it's not sitting around talking about TV, talking about life, talking about being short. You're doing activity all the way through. So it's the evening when you start talking about what you did. And we have 6-year-olds who are throwing a tennis ball, throwing a frisbee, doing their first sort of competitive. And the point being, it's competitive on a level playing field because we are all very similar, of a similar height, similar. We have 3 categories because there are differences, and we need to make that as fair as we can. And then I don't know what the oldest would have been. I think there was a 74-year-old who was swimming and diving off the podium. She terrified me. So there is a real age range, and there's competitiveness, but there is also supportiveness. And we had 600 athletes, 27 countries, and maybe 600 other supporters and family and so on.
Is it quite a refreshing experience for you to go there? And like you said, there are different categories, but ultimately everyone's of a similar size to you.
I used to call it the shot in the arm. It's like a drug. It's you suddenly go, wow. It is a line that I learned quite late in life, and there was associations for people who have different conditions. You know, there's different groups and so on. And I've always thought, well, the people who go to them, they're the ones who are struggling because it's difficult, so they need some support group. And then went and I started joining them, and I was like, oh no, it's all the ones who've joined these groups, they're the ones who are thriving because they are relishing both being themselves and the rest of the world. It's the ones who are pretending or denying or struggling. I don't want to hang out with them. I'm not like them.
Right.
Well, you are. You are like them. And I mean, equally, by the way, I meet 600 people and I don't get on with all of them. Some of them don't like me. Some of them, whatever. You know, we're different. We have different personalities, different cultural approaches. That said, I'll add one other thing. Doesn't matter what age, what country, whether you like them or not, there is a deep understanding and there is a supportive nature that I get nowhere else. And what I mean by that is if something goes wrong or someone's having some difficulty, all bets are off. You just help them. It is what you do. The last night was a club night, and I found myself next to the DJ. I don't even know what it's called. DJ desk. What do they call it? Where the DJs were.
Yeah.
And there were 300 people between me and the door, and they were packed. And I had my mobility scooter, and I'm like, oh hell, I'm never going to get past this lot. And I just started moving, maybe a foot, and suddenly everyone moves out of the way. The whole place moved out of the way. And those who were still dancing would get pushed out of the way. I mean, it was just like, let them through. And a little bit of, old bloke on the scooter. But actually, it was more, we will make your life as easy as possible because we all know. And the bit that I translate that to having dwarfism, 95% of your time is absolutely fine. It is what it is. It's fine. It's lovely. There's amazing things. And then there is times it's really difficult. And then when you're with everybody like you, they all get that. So you know that you make sure there is nothing that needs to be difficult. So yeah, it's a joyous place. This
was in Cologne, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I imagine if someone was just going there to visit on holiday and then realised it, you know where I'm going with that.
Yeah. It was a gag I used to do, actually. I had it once in Denver where they had the Little People of America. By the way, dwarf and little people are phrases or words I don't generally use, but they are names of the organisation. So, you know, that's how it is.
What word would you then, what phrase would you then use?
I just say short,
yeah.
Or I have dwarfism. Okay. It's just when you become the whole noun, a dwarf sounds a bit kind of clunky to me.
Yeah.
By the way, generational. There are people I know who are mid-20s and they use it quite happily, don't even think about it. So it's, you know, in Denver where there was 2,500 of us and I met someone afterwards and they genuinely believe that all short people live there. And you're like, you know, we find our city and we all move. So yeah, I mean, but also when you know the first day you arrive, the people in Cologne were welcoming, but they were, oh, hello. And they're looking about a bit. And suddenly there's a lot of us on all the public transport, in the cafes, wandering around. By day 3, you get on the bus And the driver said, "Oh, they know where you're going. They know what you're doing." I probably feel for anyone who had dwarfism, who happened to be living in Cologne and was nothing to do with the games, because everyone would have gone up and said, "Oh, what sports are you doing?" And you're going to the stadium and like, "No, I have a job." Yeah.
And you were doing powerlifting, bench press, and is it Boccia or Boccia?
I call it Boccia.
Boccia. I wasn't sure. And how did you get on? How was it?
It was great. So I've got to again remind, I'm 55. I said at the top of the show, I haven't done a lot of sports, and I was told not to do a lot of sports by Great Ormond Street because of certain things with my body. So to do this later. Anyway, I used to do shooting in the UK. They couldn't get the guns to Germany. And I thought, well, I need to do something else besides boccia. Boccia is the sort of beanbag. It's like ball. You have a jack. You've got to get yours to the closest, and it's done in teams or individuals. Everyone can play that, which is lovely. I wanted to do another one. And someone said, powerlifting, you lay on your back. It's the bench press, and you push the bar up. So I trained. I go to the gym anyway. I said to my trainer, "Look, can you help me? Do you want to?" And he really got into this. I mean, he put so many hours into this, way and above. And I did all right. So they don't categorize you by age. And I was a little bit disappointed by that.
You wanted that little bit.
Goodness me, it's so unfair. They literally categorize you by weight. The weigh-in still is with me. It's been a long time since I've stood in a changing room with 30 blokes in their underwear. This is not something I do very often. Also, all short blokes like me. Anyway, I did 3 lifts, all successful, and you can get a medal for the biggest single lift. And that's the one I always understand.
Yeah.
And a guy lifted 120 kilos.
Wow.
And, it's phenomenal what they do. And he won my weight category. However, they also do a cumulative total. And he failed his other 2. So there's me who did 3 plus or minus around 50. 52 kilos was my personal best. I did it there. It's amazing. So when you add all of mine up, it was 150 kilos, something like that. So I got the 3rd best total, and I got myself a bronze medal, which is ridiculous and lovely.
Amazing. Well, I mean, to be able to go there and have an amazing experience, but also to come out of it with a medal is nice as well. But also becoming an athlete in your 50s, how's that experience?
Because I appear on television, sometimes when I do a social media post, press get hold of it. And I said, I'm off to do the games. And there was some media article someone sent me that said, Gogglebox star, changing his career, becoming an athlete. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's great. Interestingly, the first 2 games I went to, I would go with a journalist badge and I'd write an article and I'd write about being there. And I thought, I'm cheating. I'm doing my kind of go there, but not doing what you should be doing. And because of how inclusive it is, there were sprinters who were 60. And it doesn't matter. You do what you do. So it's great for me to do it. Competing, being part of it. In the warm-up before the powerlifting, I'm hanging out with the 20-year-olds who I see, but we don't really always talk. We always nod and smile. But suddenly we're sharing tips, or I'm helping them, or they're wearing my wristbands. And I loved all of that. It's really, really special. And when I'd completed all my lifts and I had a moment on my own and I was walking back away from the sort of, there's 400 people watching you. It's a big, big thing for us. And I was walking back around the sort of backstage and I welled up and I can't quite work out what it is. I think it was me feeling proud that I'd done something that I didn't expect to do. I did it better than I thought I would. But just fundamentally, it was the fact that I did it. I rocked up, I did my thing, and, people supported me, and that's a really special place.
A couple of questions before I get to your piece of advice. How big of a role does comedy play in your life?
Pretty big, always has. And I think partly because the family, that's how we roll. That's how there's always been, I don't like the word banter, but quick wit and stuff. And it's just what I've always done. I've been involved with a team of comedians called Abnormally Funny People, and we still do stuff. And there's people like Liz Carr and Chris McCausland and Lost Voice Guy and Rosie Jones. So really cool comedians. And obviously doing the TV show, that's a little bit, Jane says it's not. My sister says it's not about being funny. I'm like, yeah, it is a bit. Anyway, so yeah, I like comedy. And I've also learned through my work, I could spend an hour lecturing you, telling you, or I could do a very clever gag that will cut to it. You will laugh, you'll feel weird, and it will stay with you. So having that ability is really powerful for me. Oh, the last bit I'll say is I love it. I mean, I book to go and see comedy frequently. I've just been at the Edinburgh Fringe and saw half a dozen shows. I just love it.
And you touched on it earlier as well, but being able to explore different passions, such as being on the board at the National Theatre, having those opportunities, is that it's just something you're so passionate about and you just want to give and respect those, I guess, the art form in that place?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of bits. One, it's a real privilege. It's a real honor to be asked. Back to you have to pinch yourself. How did I end up here? I'm doing a talk soon for the Royal Television Society. That is going to have everybody who is anybody in the industry there. And I've got 7-10 minutes. That's amazing. That's really awesome. Terrifying, but awesome. So, and I also know, here's the argument. We always said, if it is the same people around the boardroom table, you're going to get the same responses. Now that some boards are opening up, being different is part of me being there. It's not everything, because I still need to understand business, culture, theatre, all the other people, all the things I have to do. But I also bring another dimension, and that's really great. So, yeah, I love the fact that some of us are pushing through and in these positions of influence, sometimes power, whatever it might be.
Do you get nervous for those talks?
I'm nervous now, and it's 3 weeks away. Come the day, no, it all fades, and then you're doing it. Yeah. It's going to happen, and it's not new. In theory, I'm not going to do this, by the way, but in theory, you could say you're doing it in 5 minutes, go and do it. And I'd be able to do it because I have done it a lot. I know what is important and what I care about. So in that sense, it's experience has got rid of that anxiety. But no, it nags me all the time. It nags me all the way building up. Yeah.
People will take a lot away from this conversation, but if there was something that you would want someone listening to take away from it in whatever aspect, what would you want that to be?
Is this a bit of advice?
It's not the advice yet.
Right.
I'm doubling up.
Okay, that's fine. Then if I would relate back to your theme is about being outside.
Active, yeah.
Yeah, and my bit would say, I'm nicking Nike. I'd say do it. And my bit is you will hesitate and you're trying something you haven't done before. But you'll only regret what you don't do. So, and I'm doing things at an older age with a disability, and they are hugely nourishing and sometimes nervy. But so I would just say, yeah, if you got a feeling about something, yeah, get out and do it.
Simon, I'm so grateful for having this conversation. Where can people go to find out more about you and what you do?
I'm on social media, so the Instagram, Twitter. I have a website called sminty.net, which is more about my company. So yeah, any of there.
And the final thing I need from you is a piece of advice that I can pass along to a guest coming on in the near future. You're panicking.
I'm panicking. I'm cheating. I told you I was writing a chapter of a book about dwarfism, entertainment, all that stuff. And I am talking about Peter Dinklage, who is the actor who played Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. Doesn't change it for everybody, but there is a line that I'm going to quote. And so I'm stealing Tyrion Lannister's, Peter Dinklage's line, which says, "Never forget what you are." Because the rest of the book, I'm going to say that again. Never forget what you are. The rest of the world will not. Wear it like armor, and it can never be used to hurt you. That's quite a rallying cry, but if I interpret that, is be yourself. You are good, and be proud of that, because if you are, then the rest of it will bounce off.
I love that advice. I look forward to passing it along. Simon, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure, Dom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Outside and Active podcast with my special guest, Simon Minty. I hope you enjoyed it and could take something from our conversation. As I said at the beginning, if you think you know someone who would enjoy this episode or this podcast just as much as you, then please do forward it on to them so we can grow this Outside and Active community. If you're watching on YouTube, then please subscribe and hit that like button. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, then follow along and listen to some of the other podcasts with some incredible guests. We'll be back next week with another episode. I've been Dominic Brown, but until that time, enjoy the outdoors.